Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Come Away by Yourselves. This week we have a special episode. We will not post a podcast meditation, but rather post an interview that I did with Jake Jakubisin for his new podcast called Sons and Kings. Sons and Kings is a very cool concept. It's a podcast that will be discussing and analyzing a beautiful psalm in the Bible, Psalm 2, about divine filiation and other wonderful spiritual themes. So Dan asked me to be interviewed as a kind of foundational episode, one of several foundational episodes for the Psalm 2 Sons and Kings podcast. And I didn't have time and I didn't have the opportunity to record my own meditation this week. I'm a little bit busy. So instead of rebroadcasting an old one, I figured let's put this interview up for this audience, the Come Away by Yourselves audience. And maybe that might also spark your interest in this other podcast called Sons and Kings. Thank you very much, all of you, for listening and for your support and prayers. I certainly pray for everyone who listens to Come Away by Yourselves.
Welcome. You're listening to Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show where we unlock the church's ancient battle cry of divine filiation and embrace the gentle kingship of Christ through the riches of the Christian tradition. Happy Tuesday. Let's begin.
We all have a real capacity to heal ourselves and to become other Christs. And that's, if you get to heaven, you've done that. That's why purgatory is so important for most of us, because we don't do enough of the work here, and so you got to go to the body shop, right, to get those dents worked out and get ready.
Okay, welcome back to the Psalm 2 show. I'm here with Father John Grieco, based out of Boston, Massachusetts. How you doing today, Father John?
Great. It's good to be here with you, Dan.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on the show. And, I remember so fondly some of our classes that I got to take with you, metaphysics, for example, the donuts you would bring to class. That's the main thing I remember. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's usually the case.
But so we wanted to bring you on the show because of the kind of the nature of Psalm 2 and how much it has to say about, the human person, the human experience, our journey, our integral human development, as children of God. And just if you could kind of peel back some of the layers for us today of kind of like, a little peek under the hood of the human person and kind of what's going on. This is what we're going to try to kind of dive into a little bit today. And so before we got on, we were talking about, philosophical anthropology. Explain again, like, how is that different from Christian anthropology, just for anybody out there?
I think that the big distinction would be between philosophical anthropology and theological anthropology, which basically tracks onto the distinction between studying anything theologically versus philosophically. And I think that the key difference there would be whether or not you're taking revealed truths as the basis for your interpretation. Philosophical anthropology, or philosophy in general, doesn't take for granted or take at it as this kind of subject or data points, if you will, divinely revealed truths as such, whereas theology, of course, does, right? So when you do theology, you're looking at scripture, you're looking at the rest of the deposit of faith, you're looking at the church's teachings. When you do philosophy, you're looking more just at like what other people have thought about human experience or human history, but things that are just more accessible to reason without access to faith.
Cool. So the thing that I always think about with regards to revealed truth is that thing right from the beginning, right? Genesis, we are made in the image and likeness of God.
Sure.
And so, for example, that would be, theological anthropology. Okay, what does that mean? But what can we know about a person if we don't take that for granted?
Well, you could know a lot. I mean, I think people, even if they don't have that access to revelation through faith, even if they've never read those words of Genesis, their own experience of themselves as a person and the value of other people can give them a sense of their dignity. And even there's a kind of a natural religious instinct in people, a natural religious sense in many people and many cultures, that all of this has to come from some other source, right? Some divine gift, some divine source. So yeah, I think uh, Revelation makes something much more explicit, which we have inklings of, or we can kind of come to a more vague grasp of in our own love of each other and in our own sense of our own worth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And in a sense, the difference also between us and other animals
Right.
who aren't rational, we can see that there's a difference there.
Sure.
So when we put it in terms of that, sometimes you hear about these faculties of the soul, maybe the intellect, will, we have the passions. What can we know about a person based on the fact that like, we have these faculties?
Well, yeah, I think you start there, right? The dignity of the human person, you know, just leave aside God's revealing it. Our uniqueness compared to the other animals is clear just in the vast superiority of our language. Very few animals have any sort of art or technique. If they do, it's kind of repetitive. It's the same thing, right? Beavers will make dams, but men make and women, right, make cathedrals and homes and boats, airplanes and computers, right? So so therefore the intelligence is clearly a sign of our dignity and superiority over animals and all other beings in this natural created order. And then our freedom, right? It's our freedom, our sense of responsibility. We're held accountable for actions because we have the sense that, well, I could have done that better. I was responsible for that, or I should have known better. Whereas a dog really, if a dog bites someone, you're upset, bad dog, but you don't actually morally blame him, right? If anything, you blame his owners for not training for training. The dog doesn't go to jail when he kills someone, right? The owners might. Yeah. So those are the two. I think our freedom in setting our courses in life and our responsibility there for our actions, and we're held responsible for those. We're praised for the good ones. We're kind of blamed for the bad ones when it's in our power. And then our mind, right? The capacity for creativity, art, work, right? All these things that we see, the human influence on the world. Yeah.
So you touched on our freedom as well as sort of the sense of, hey, I should have known better, or like that was wrong, right? That that the dog that is biting people does not have.
Right.
Is that what makes us these kind of moral agents? The fact that we have an intellect and freedom, or is there something more to all that?
Um, I don't know if there's anything more to it, but certainly those things are what makes us free is that we have a will that can freely choose to act in one way or another. And that's connected too with our minds, because unless our mind can give the will options or give our freedom different options, then there's no choice, right? And so, for instance, a dog is always going to do. There might be a competition in a dog between this emotion or that emotion, right? This instinct or that instinct. But in the end, it's just kind of determined, right, by which emotions or which instinct kind of takes over. We can very clearly, I think, when we're at our best, we can very clearly kind of like step outside of the input of emotions and think more on the level of, okay, what's the true course here? What am I pursuing? What should I be pursuing? Given this object of pursuit, what are the best ways to get there? And then choose, right, between options. So I think that the mind and the will work very much in tandem, right? The more you reflect, the more, given the constraints of time and necessity, of course, but the more you reflect well about your life and about your goals, the better your will can choose the right options, right? Yeah, those are very closely connected.
Yeah. So I guess now would be a good time for me to come back to like the emotions, like some of those passions that we experience,
Sure.
because sometimes it does seem like there's conflicting emotions that are definitely messing with the intellect for sure, and at least in my experience, and also making it very difficult in a sense to figure out what my will is actually, saying. So how do the emotions work? How do they fit with all this? And what are we supposed to think about them?
Yeah, so emotions are all. Someone said it this way recently, which I liked. Emotions are all purposeful, right? They're not always true or accurate to the whole truth of your life or your situation, but they always have a point, right? And you have to take that point into consideration. And so, since we're bodily beings, right? It's good for us to have actions to what we sense and what we experience that are bodily, right? They tell us, oh, I'm supposed to eat because I'm hungry. We don't think of hunger as an emotion, but it kind of is, right? Anything that we um, experience as a passion or an effect, right? Hunger is a kind
A
of
drive
desire.
of some kind.
Yeah, right. So hunger is like a desire, and a desire is an emotion, right? You get that. Or I'm afraid, right? Well, what does that do? It alerts me that there's a possible danger here that's remote, which would be like worry or anxiety, or that's proximate, and that's more like fear, like an immediate fear of some threat, so that I can react, right? And the emotions like rouse our body and prepare our body to react in ways that are appropriate to our surroundings, right? Our physical stimuli. And so, hunger because you need to eat, right? Anger because there's something threatening that you think, hey, maybe I can take it out. So you're like, you'll get it, right? Sadness because something that you want or enjoy has been taken from you. Pain is for Thomas, pain and sadness kind of go together. There's a similar thing. When you're experiencing like some loss, in your body, and so an injury is like a loss, and the healing process is painful, right? Or the injury itself is painful because there's been damage, right? So the complication with the human being is that we're not just physical. So these things happen. These things we can have emotional reactions not just to like real physical stimuli, but also to real or imagined, right, psychological stimuli. And so emotions can be. It's fascinating, right? Emotions can be triggered by thoughts that have very little purchase in reality. And you think, oh, that's crazy. Why would I be upset about a thought that's not true? Well, welcome to the human race, right? This happens to people. Happens to people all the time. And not just like, oh, that guy's really crazy, but all sorts, I think this is one of the big challenges in life, right? Is to get our thoughts and not just our emotions, but our thoughts and our emotions in line with the way things really are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so maybe our thoughts are right, but our emotions don't match up to, right? It's like, oh, I'm too fearful of this or that. And I know I shouldn't be that fearful. And then that's a process, right? It's like, okay, patience, courage. And you have to learn how to like feel the right way about the right thought. Sometimes the problem is not just the emotions are too exaggerated, but the thoughts are off, or the judgments are off. Why am I so afraid of what people think about me? Why am I so afraid of failure? Well, because that's not just a thought like, oh, I really care about failure. It's also like an attachment of your heart. It's like you love failure too much, right? And so all these things kind of go together in the human person. And since we have original sin and we have our own experiences, which shape us, and we have our own mistakes, every person's like a mystery that has to figure out how to try to heal it and put it all together, right? And thank God Jesus is the savior, the soter, right? The healer. And so he helps a lot. Faith helps a lot. Anyway, I feel like I'm kind of rambling here.
No. This is good.
Any particular questions along the way of
Yeah.
that
No, I did have a couple.
speed tour of the passions? Yeah, go ahead.
So you talked about, well, first of all, you said you love failure too much. Can you explain that
That's
expression?
it. Love failure?
Yeah.
No, I meant fear failure.
Fear. Oh, okay. So you're
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
giving too much stock to failure as a threat to your
Right, right, exactly.
happiness or
Sure,
okay.
sure, sure. So it's interesting. Aquinas says that all the emotions stem from one basic emotion, which is love. And love is the reaction of the soul to a good, right? And so just the first movement of the emotion love is just like appreciation, a general appreciation for the good, which is kind of cool. It's called affection. It's like, you know, that's a good thing, you know? It's like
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah,
Our soul can say, hey, we appreciate the good. Then there's desire, right, for goods that we see that if I had that thing, it would be even better, right? I really could enjoy it for myself. And then there's pleasure or joy when we actually achieve the thing that we desire. Okay. The cool thing though is, and which most people don't think about, is that the negative emotions like sadness, anger, fear also stem from love. They're the flip side of the things that we love. And so when we have a great fear, it's because we're afraid that we're going to lose something we love. Or afraid that we won't get something that we love. And when we have a great sorrow, it's because we have lost or we despair, right? And there's also like there's different like little different
nuances.
distinctions in these emotions, right? Despair is actually an emotion for Aquinas, right? You could despair of never achieving a good that you really desire, right? And that causes sadness too. Or you lose some good that you enjoyed, right? See, all these things kind of work in tandem and they all work around love. And so I think a lot of what happens in the psychological and the spiritual life is you have to figure out what you're loving too much. If you want to be less sorrowful, you have to figure out, okay, what what have I lost? And some of those losses, yeah, you're going to be sorrowful, right? You lose a friend, you lose a family member, you lose a job. Okay, that's a natural reaction, right? I'm sad because I lost
Right.
the job of the family member, right? But then you say, what do I still have, right? It's like, and so this is where the faith
Sure.
comes in. It's like I'm still a son of God. I still have Jesus Christ. I can still go to I can still go to heaven. I can use this to like grow in resilience, right? And so the truth of the faith gives us enough like goods and perspective in truth to be able to discern not just, okay, this is normal to be sad or to be fearful because these are goods that are threatened or taken from me, but also gives us enough like wherewithal to live through it and to regain a certain peace and hope and joy and confidence, even in difficult experiences. So this is a long story to make one point, which is that if you're really afraid of something, it's a good question to say, what am I too attached to? Right? Why, especially if you realize this is an exaggerated fear,
Right.
should not be so anxious about this or that. Well, could mean that you're overvaluing something. You love it too much or in the wrong way, right? If you
Sure.
just like recalibrated that and accepted the fear that it's exaggerated, well, then you'd grow in peace and courage, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense, except for the fact that when you say like love too much, it seems like as Christians we're asked to like love and grow in love, enlarge the heart, like, and so yeah, and I want to go to like an example that I'm thinking of, and you said that love progresses in a sense from appreciation to
Yeah.
joy,
Joy,
but we're not necessarily always supposed
pleasure.
to progress towards everything in that same way. And the example that comes to mind, for example, is when you think about the love of a father for a child. Recently, I've been hearing, and I think even Pope Francis talked about this. The love should not be possessive
Right.
towards a child, and if it is, now maybe there's going to be a problem, so to speak. So, but we're not supposed to progress in love necessarily, or can you explain
Well,
that distinction?
yeah, so I think you have to distinguish between what I was talking about there was the Aquinas's analysis of how emotions depend on each other, right? And they all come from an apprehension of the good, right? So if you have something good, you can just appreciate it disinterestedly. You can desire it in some way. And if you are in contact with it, it brings you a certain joy or pleasure, right? And so that's not even a moral analysis. That's just like the way things work, even in animals. you can see,
Sure, sure.
you can see that, right? You can see that in animals.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you talk about love more spiritually or ethically, Well, now you're talking about um, having to create, act towards things and try to feel about things and try to be in a certain way towards things in a way that respects their objective nature, right? And their objective value or position in your life, right? Sometimes, yes, sometimes we can exaggerate the value of something such that we don't really love it in the way that's good for us or good for it or good for our relationship with God. And so if you're so obsessed about your career, right, that you're just you know, totally afraid of failure and fear motivated in doing all your work and working too much, well, your relationships with the people who are more important to you than your career or that your career should be for, are going to suffer, right? And so that I think that's probably what like Pope Francis is getting at. When you were talking that example you gave of a possessive love, it's like, okay, I can love my son in a way that is proper and virtuous, right? Because it's for his sake and because it's moderate and because it's like keeping God in mind as the point of all of our loves and the source of all our loves. Or I can love my son like in a selfish way, right? So I can love him as a reflection of myself. I can love him because of what the joy he brings to my life. And I can still, you still be loving him a lot and wanting a lot of good things for him, but there'll be something off about it if it's not like for his sake and for his eternal salvation, right? And not just for his earthly good. Yeah, I
Right.
don't know if that clarifies things.
It does. It does. Yeah, no, for sure. And I love that in your previous comment about this, that you talk about each human as its own mystery. Maybe, what am I loving too much? And I also love that there's a certain like patience and grace that you want to give to each person
Yeah.
to figure
Starting with
that
yourself.
out. What's that? Right, right. And that's like very encouraging because I think like like a lot of people, at least the people that I talk to.
You
Uh,
froze.
oh, can you hear me?
I didn't hear the last sentence. You froze for me.
Oh, okay. I was saying I think a lot of people, especially the people that I talk to, life is oftentimes this mystery, and their own life is
Yeah.
like this mystery. And it's hard to be patient with it. Uh, like, where does that come from, or what do we do with that?
Where does the where does it come from?
Where does our lack of patience with our own mystery of life come from?
Yeah,
And is that good?
it depends on the person and the personality, right? It depends on what you're being impatient with, right? So every life is different. So for some people, it might be, well, there's just like, there's a very difficult situation in their life. Maybe they're sick, right? Maybe there's a difficult relationship, right? That's not getting better. And so that would just be a normal, understandable impatience with a situation. I think for a lot of people, the kind of impatience you're talking about is, I hate to say this, but it's probably pride, right? That we want the job of being good people to be over, right? We want to kind of be certain and assured of our own personal excellence and our own personal goodness. And that is a kind of sneaky kind of pride, and it's an impatience born of pride. And so I think it's very important that people understand that virtue takes time, and especially purification. The saints all talk about this, the need for purification. St. John of the Cross, right? The dark night of the soul, the dark night of the spirit. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, right? Talks about periods of desolation that can last for a long time. You look at the lives of the saints. Saint Josemaria went through from very difficult times. Saint Teresa of Calcutta, right? And there's just moments where God puts the soul in a painful situation, and it can be very difficult to understand why it's happening because you don't think you've done much wrong. You think you always have the right intentions, and you think, this doesn't make any sense. Not fair. This can happen because of tragedy, or it can just be like an interior emotional experience. you lose interest in something you always loved, or you lose faith in something you always you always had faith in, um, or something happens like, why did that happen? What the heck? God could have prevented that. Anyway, there are there are different ways into a very trying circumstance in life. And I think it's very important for Christians, if you really believe that all things work into the good for those who love God, and you really believe, as Psalm 2 tells us, right, that God is your father, it's very important for Christians to just stay, you have to stay in that. You have to stay with it. You have to think big about it. You have to realize, okay, God knows what he's doing, right? Saint Therese of Lisieux says he doesn't allow any suffering without bringing some good out of it. And so I think sometimes the lack of patience can be either it's because we're impatient with our own defects and we want to say, let's get this over with, or we don't understand, we don't have enough faith to trust God enough in times of trial and suffering. Um, and that's normal. It's just like God puts you to the test, and if you can't hack it, he says, okay, you'll be less holy, but I'll still, I still love you.
And
Anyway,
and
I don't
then
know if
there's the
that helped.
process of yeah. No, for sure, for sure.
Certainly attachments, we're not aware of our attachments until God takes them
Test
away.
them. Or
Yeah,
take
yeah, yeah.
yeah. There's some kind of trial or of some kind.
Yeah,
Right.
right. And so, it's like, what's the point of life? What's the greatest commandment in the law? Love the Lord your heart love the Lord your God, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. And a second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And there's just a lot of, there's a lot of self-centeredness in us naturally. There's a lot of self-centeredness in us that builds up because of our habits and our upbringing. There's a lot of materialism. So there's a lot of stuff that, has to be like undone and reshaped and purified for us to get to the point where, yeah, I actually love God, you know, number one, and my heart, with all my mind, with all my soul, with all my strength, and actually love others as myself. And that reshaping, it takes some work. It takes some pain because those attachments are real. It takes some time. Yeah.
So where does that like wounded nature? I know where it comes from theologically. That like
Concupiscence.
concupiscence. Excuse me. Thank you. But how? Because we're like made in the image and likeness of God. But then I don't think we would go so far as like Calvin, who talks about like total depravity.
Yeah, that's right.
So how are we to understand the wounded nature itself? Because that obviously goes into that right to that point about the fixing of it, the gradually reconfiguring it.
Yeah. So the Catholic view is very realistic, but also extremely optimistic. This is the call to holiness. The call to the call to holiness means that if you respond, you know, generously or as best you can, even if you respond like 50%, you know, you'll get
A little
better.
baseball action, like
Yeah. No, I like to use that. I like to use that analogy. It's like, if in
you're batting
baseball,
300.
3 out of 10 is good, right? If you fulfill 3 out of 10 of your resolutions, you're doing all right. Anyway. No, so for a Catholic, sanctification is real. It's not the famous Lutheran image of gilding the turd, right? So Luther said, okay, yeah, we go to heaven, but it's like Luther or Calvin. I can't remember, one of those guys. I think it's Luther. We go to heaven, but it's like we're a gilded manure. Right? You're still crap, but now you have this covering of gold and God accepts you into heaven. No, the Catholic view, which is the call to holiness, is that we all have a real capacity to heal ourselves and to become other Christs. And that's, if you get to heaven, you've done that. That's why purgatory is so important for most of us, because we don't do enough of the work here. And so you got to go to the body shop, right? To get those dents worked out and get ready. Yeah. So back to your question. So the nature in the Catholic view, the nature is wounded, but it's not totally corrupt, and it's absolutely healable by Christ. And so the Greek word for savior is soter. And so soter also means healing. And so when
Mm-hmm.
the church studies the doctrine of salvation, it's called soteriology, based on the
Yeah.
Greek word soter, right? And so Jesus comes as a physical healer, and that physical healing that he performs in the miracles is a sign, it's just a little indication of how much he wants to heal our
Huh.
souls. Yeah, that's
No, that's interesting because even from a medical perspective, we would say that, for example, a wound or something had the capacity to be healed.
right.
So we're saying the same thing about us as opposed to kind of a total depravity or what have you.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
And, healing, God can do it in a second if he wants, but usually because he wants us to merit and he wants us to grow in humility, usually healing takes time, right? You got to go to physical therapy. You got to, put up with the aches and pains of post-surgery, right? And so the same thing we are talking about before, if you think about your incorporation of your soul, having your thoughts be right, guided by faith, having your will be right, searching for the good, having your emotions as much as possible in line with those things, right? That optimal configuration of the soul, which would let us love God more easily and more generously, love others more easily and more generously. Well, that reconfiguration takes time
Mm-hmm.
because of the original sin. So usually it takes time. There are kind of instantaneous conversions and, instantaneous virtues that God grants in special cases to saints. But usually because he wants us to grow in trust, he's always after the bigger virtues, right? Because he wants us to grow in trust, because he wants us to participate in his cross, because he wants us to be humbled many times, right? By the process, by the experience of wanting to be better and not being better yet, and having these thoughts I don't want to have, having these feelings I don't want to have, giving into these behaviors I don't want to give into. It's like, why is God letting this go on so long? Well, so you can be a little more humble, right? Because you're much more proud than you think you are. Because it's humbling, right? To keep going back to confession and to keep struggling with the thing and to keep having the same impatience and the same outbursts. Like, oh, it's like, yeah, because you're not, you're nothing, right? You're a sinner. God loves you and you're a son of God, but okay, there's an experience of your nothingness. And, you know, the sooner you learn the lesson and say, yeah, this is who I am. Jesus help me, save me. The sooner you get better. Anyway, so all those things are reasons for being patient and taking time, right? It takes time to reconfigure. It takes time to grow in humility. God can have all sorts of reasons for keeping someone in a difficult process, but you need the perspective. If you don't have the perspective of faith in the spiritual life, it's very hard to understand what's happening.
So is that what holiness is? That sort of moment of, hey, okay, like God can heal me.
Yeah, I think it's probably,
If you developed a consistent habit of that,
yeah, it's
would you
certainly,
say that
I
habit
wouldn't say,
is holiness?
yeah, no, I wouldn't say that that's all holiness is, right? So if you wanted a one word definition of holiness, it would probably be charity, because God is love. But since we're sinners, yes, I do think, and if you read the gospel, it's okay, yeah, since we're sinners, I do think being capable of loving takes moments where you have to admit that you need God, right? Jesus says, without me, you could do nothing. And so, right, so holiness is love, but it's love that we're not capable of just with our own effort, right? And so to come to that moment where you say, I need you to help me to love. I need you to heal me so that I can love, right? I need you to love through me because I can't do it on my own, right? Because I sin on my own or I lack love or I'm indifferent. Yeah. So it's certainly a moment of holiness. I wouldn't define holiness just in that way though.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so, and that puts into perspective, in a sense, you said, man's natural state is to have a religious sense, or the sense that there is a God, there is a
Yeah.
creator, and I
Sure.
owe him something, right? Mixed with all kinds of other desires, appreciations, desires, and then hopefully, joys or fears, right? Of, hey, there's other things. And so this natural process of reordering, so to speak, everything so that we are putting not just a religious sense, but a true kind of alignment.
Yeah, that's right. So even, even in a non-Christian context, it's like, Aristotle and Plato and these people, they all had that sense too that um, the virtuous soul was the well-ordered soul, right? And the well-ordered soul was the soul that was in contact with the truth, like outside of itself, right? So the virtuous person is not just someone who is just towards others or is self-controlled interiorly or isn't too afraid of things, right? He has bravery, but also someone who is in touch with somehow the divine, right? And so the virtuous person and the philosopher for Aristotle and Plato were kind of closely connected, right? So in order to really put your soul in true order, you needed to be in touch with the deepest truths and the highest like virtuous beings, right? Um, so yeah, this whole idea of human nature as a project is not just Christian, right? It's, if you think about like, okay, reaching Zen or reaching Nirvana, right? These other things too, they have their limitations, but they're all about thinking in the right way, connected to acting in the right way, connected to having your soul like aligned correctly, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And part of that alignment is sort of the patience that it will come about. Like, he who began a good work in me will bring it to completion.
that's
Right.
right.
Okay. Okay. Well, we gotta kind of close here. We're getting to the end of the
Really?
time here
Already? I
together,
thought you
Father
haven't
John. It goes fast. It goes fast. But we're
fun.
gonna get into this a lot of the episodes about how like what Psalm 2 has to say about like that lived human experience of
Yeah,
trying to
I read it
align.
this morning to prepare for this interview.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Well, so I'm glad to hear that, and I think that you're somebody that probably does read and pray about Psalm 2. So I wanted to end with that question. Like what does Psalm 2 mean to you, Father John?
What does it mean to me? Well, yeah, so maybe two thoughts. I mean, first in relation to this conversation, right? About the soul and the emotions. One is that it presupposes that life is difficult, right? It's all about defeating enemies. And so yeah, there are difficulties in life. There are things that will bring us fear, consternation, etc. The answer to that is confidence because God is your father, right? And so the psalm ends up like, okay, but they're going to lose. Whoever's opposed to you is going to lose because you've got the backing of the Most High, right? So that's an important thing to like realize, okay, there's difficulties in life, but I have to be courageous. And courage is not a feeling primarily. It's based on the conviction that God is real, God is on my side. So even when I don't feel courageous, I can act bravely because I'm convinced of my faith, right? And the other thing I would say, what Psalm 2 means to me, of course, is just divine filiation, right? This day I have begotten you. And that's kind of cool because it's always in the present tense, right? This day, right? Today I have begotten you. And so just to, like the deep theology of it is that Jesus is the eternally begotten Son, which means that wherever Jesus is, he's being begotten by the Father. And so his filiation is always new. It's always today. It's always right now. Jesus' sonship is always brand new because God is eternal and eternity is the eternal present. And so two things there, which is kind of cool. It's like, well, this day, yeah, my affiliation, therefore, is always new. And I'm always not just a child of God, but I'm a newborn son of God because we're sons in the Son, right? Our filiation is a participation in Jesus's filiation. So I think that's kind of cool. It's like we can always, it's like, hey, what's new? You check your phone. Oh, what's the score? What am I missing? Right? Well, my affiliation is always like brand new, right? And
Yeah.
you know, God is always looking at you as if you're just this newborn child, right? That He loves. And then the other cool thing about that is now I'm sorry, I'm going overtime. The other cool
No,
thing about that is like if you think of the Eucharist, it's like who's in the Eucharist? Jesus is present, the only Son of God. but it's the Son begotten by the Father. And so anytime you have Mass, you have the Son being begotten by the. There is no Son without the begetting of the Father. So to be in the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist is also to be in the presence of our Father God, like who's so eternally begetting the Son. Anyway, that's what I would.
I love that. I love that. Those are very beautiful thoughts as always, Father John. If there's somebody wanted to hear more of those, you have your own podcast.
Yeah. Where can you reach me? Yeah, my socials. This sounds like this is our typical podcast.
You know how we do it. So come away by yourselves, right?
That's right. Yeah.
If somebody wanted to.
Come away by yourselves. It's a
love it.
Well, it's a meditation podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And rate and review. Or I haven't had a lot of ratings or reviews.
Man,
recently.
What are these people doing? What have I done?
I don't know.
I don't think I've ever left a review.
They just take. They just keep taking and taking and taking. They never get back.
All right, you hear that out there, everybody? When you listen to Come Away by yourselves, you better leave a review. 5 stars only. 5 stars. Well, good. Father John, thank you for coming on to the Psalm 2 show.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, this is Jake. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're really glad that you joined us today. We hope you got something out of it. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to share with a friend or even just like or subscribe to the platform. It really helps us to get the message out to more people, help more people with the show. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.